there will be nowhere to hide. We are going to be surveilled to the max like we've never seen before. I argue that, in fact, it might be worse that Trump won, because a lot of freedom-minded people who do trust Trump are now going to be pacified, and they're going to say, well, look, I'll just trust Trump. I'll trust the plan. Trump's in power. Elon's in control. RFK's there. They're doing all the work. So I don't need to worry about my own life now. I can let them and just trust them. But if Kamala had won, there probably would be more resistance to these different issues that I think we're going to still see progress under Trump and Musk.
Before we get into today's conversation with Derrick, I want to tell you about the People's Reset Mexico, taking place from the 29th of January to the 2nd of February in Morelia, Mexico. If you didn't already know, Derrick and I collaborated together on the People's Reset UK last summer, and now we're back once again in Mexico for the premier freedom event in the annual calendar. For those of you who are disillusioned with the political paradigm, this is the place where you will learn grassroots solutions across 5 core themes: liberate your mind, body, and soul, permaculture and food independence, agorism and parallel networks, empowering technology, and building free and conscious communities. If you're ready to escape the British winter, then come and join us in Morelia for 5 days alongside freedom fighters from across the world. It's going to be an incredible experience with talks, workshops, live activations, and more. Evening events, music, connection. It's going to be an incredible experience. If you're at the People's Reset UK, then you know what it's all about. But it's the 3-day event on steroids, because we're together for 5 days in Mexico. So get your ticket today at danastingregory.com/TPR. Now to our conversation with Derrick. It's my pleasure to introduce my dear friend and returning guest, Derrick Broze, to the Dan Astin-Gregory podcast. At the point of recording this, we are just days away from the Trump inauguration. And as a result, many people have got themselves either incredibly excited or fallen into the pits of despair. And social media would have us believe that there is nothing in between. So today we are going to assess the impact of the political sphere on our day-to-day lives. Is there an alternative? And how do we actually make sense of this increasingly polarized world? Now, I've known Derrick for some time, and I've been following his work for even longer. He's an independent journalist, an author, an activist, and the founder of the People's Reset, which I had the great pleasure of helping to bring to the United Kingdom at the end of last year. And in fact, at the same time that we're recording this, we're not far off the People's Reset Mexico as well, which you're going to hear about at the end of today's episode. Derrick is essentially, in my view, one of the most pioneering freedom fighters out there at the moment, who is relentlessly charging ahead to offer not only solutions, but to empower people to take control of their destiny. So Derrick, it's wonderful to have you back again. Thanks so much for taking out the time to be with us, which I know, having worked together on the People's Reset with you, is a very busy time. So great to see you again.
Thank you for having me back, Dan. It is a busy time, but it's a beautiful time to be reconnecting and sharing ideas with people, because I think there's so many people who are looking for some new ideas after watching the political world go a little bit nuts.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's easy to say that. And so here's the thing, at the point of release now, this is being released on the 16th of January. So Trump is going to be inaugurated on the 20th. And there's a lot of people, and a lot of people in the freedom movement as well, Derrick, who are actually very excited about this. There's a lot of optimism. Some would say hope. The winds of change are here. A lot of people are putting a lot of faith into Trump and his administration to create some of that change. On the flip side, there are his opponents who feel like the devil incarnate is here. So we've got some who think this guy is divinely inspired and is literally a figment of God. And then you have others who think he's the devil incarnate. So we've got this incredibly emotionalized, polarized response to a human being who has won the election again, seemingly against the odds. Where do you sit on this? Do you have any hope at all? Do you have any excitement whatsoever? You're going to be there at the inauguration. Do you have any excitement whatsoever around this?
So it's interesting because I listened to your conversation with Charles Eisenstein and his sort of like, it's not the devil incarnate, and it's not, somebody here ordained by God, that there's sort of a middle ground there. I would tend to agree with that on some fronts. I also think that there are a lot of people who are being fooled, who are being deceived by Trump. And like you said, this sort of apparent come from behind victory despite 2 assassination attempts and all this lawfare and people not thinking he could possibly overcome all the odds. Trump has overcome those things and has united RFK and Tulsi and all these different people from seemingly different corners of the political spectrum to come together for this MAGA movement. That's, I think, a charitable look at the situation. I tend to have, I don't want to say pessimistic. I think it's just based on the facts of looking at who Trump has surrounded himself already with, the people he is nominating to his incoming cabinet. Of course, as you said, he hasn't, taken office yet, but once he does, those people will be up for confirmation. And if those people do indeed get into his cabinet, I think it's not going to be anything in terms of advancing individual liberty, which is always my kind of, North Star. Like, is this person, is this policy, is this effort going to advance individual liberty? Because I think from individual liberty, everything else can spring: freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of movement, freedom of choice, etc. Bodily autonomy, obviously, which we've recognized is so important in the last few years. If we don't have individual liberty, then I don't think we have much of what we've been fighting for. And I say we sort of broadly. I'm in North America, you're on the other side of the ocean there, but we know that there's friends and family all around the world, just like us, who are fighting for a better world. And I think that individual liberty has to be the kind of core of it. So when you look at it from that perspective, and you look at, again, some of the connections, which I'm happy to get into today, to the people in Trump's cabinet, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and others, I don't think that there's reasons to be extremely optimistic. It doesn't mean that perhaps there won't be some superficial changes that we could look at and say, hey, look, this thing isn't happening the way it was before. But I don't think the overall picture is going to be brighter when it comes to individual liberty.
Even though, yeah, so my brain almost asked 3 questions at once before I even started there. Let's begin with the kind of crazy polarized reactions. To me, it's, if I just take an objective view on the way I see, and I literally said to you before I started, I was laughing out loud at some of the things I've got quoted on my notes here that people have said either in favor of or against at the extreme level. And I kind of chuckled in despair, really, because it feels like a point in history where we've almost lost our sanity, but I have to remind myself that those sensationalized projections aren't the main. It isn't the majority, or at least I hope it's not the majority. But what do you think is behind these extreme reactions to Trump's victory?
Well, I think you kind of hinted at one important element there in, it's a whole nother rabbit hole that maybe we'll get into, but the idea that we can't necessarily trust the reactions, whether positive or negative, that we're seeing on social media. I've been taking a step back recently. I posted something on Twitter, on X, about the Snowden leaks, which is now 11 years ago, going back to Edward Snowden leaking documents, not only from the United States National Security Agency, the NSA, but from the British GCHQ as well. And I was looking back at those documents and reflecting on how those documents were already a few years old by the time they'd been leaked. But even going back more than a decade, we know that those agencies, at least those 2 agencies, and I'm sure more as part of the Five Eyes nations, that they specifically said that they would create fake accounts on social media and that their goal was to delay, disrupt, divide. And they had these whole D's of what their goals were, and that it would include creating fake accounts. It would include pushing certain stories, pushing certain narratives. And so I bring that up to say that I believe those of us who are concerned of trying to stay in control of our hearts and our minds and our spirits, we need to remain critical thinkers and to be skeptical of the things that we see are trending on Twitter or trending on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or wherever else, because we can't necessarily even trust those things. And in fact, those things may have been placed there to make us feel a certain way. We know this, that they game social media and that they have studied social media and can see, for example, one study showed that young women who are on Instagram and spend quite a bit of time there come away feeling insecure about themselves, and because they're looking at influencers or other people and judging themselves. My point is, we do need to be skeptical of some of the narratives and the extreme views, whether that's extreme, like Trump is the savior here to save us all, and he's going to, fix all of our problems, to the other end that, the whole world is literally about to end. I think that those extremes, unfortunately, often get the loud, those are like the loudest voices, and the algorithms, we know, don't necessarily favor facts for one, but also don't necessarily favor more nuanced perspectives. They favor the hot takes, the extreme takes that you can pump out in a 1 minute, 2 minute TikTok video, whether that's for or against Trump. So I just want to kind of add that caveat there, that I think we should be very skeptical of the stories that are being put in front of us, and try to just remain heart-centered and focused and take in this information, because on a day-to-day basis, every time I log online, there's some new trending drama or controversy or something that is inviting us to join in and be a part of it and throw in your 2 cents and share this video. And I try to do my best to sort of float above those things and sort of watch them. So while I'm watching all the hysteria around Trump, and I do think, again, there's good reason to be a little hysterical about what's happening, what's incoming. I think it's most important that people are just staying in control of your own mind and your own heart. Like, that should be a good goal for 2025 going forward, because if you understand fifth generation warfare, which is a term that is more and more people are becoming familiar with, it's essentially just the idea that social media and the internet and our minds are the battlefield. And this is, the way that the military and intelligence agencies around the world are starting to view things. So when we step onto our computers and onto our phones, we need to be aware that we're not just going, looking at the internet and reading fun articles or looking at silly videos. That might be part of it, but there's also lots of information that has been placed there purposefully to make us feel this way or that way, to make us have some sort of reaction. And that is all by design. So the more that you're kind of in control and you're the one that's in charge up here and in your heart, then it's less easy for those various forces to manipulate you. And I think that's what I've been kind of zeroing in on with all the hype around Trump.
Yeah, it's so important. I want to come back to your point around the North Star of liberty, because coming out of the gate in this conversation, I know that there'll be people in my audience who are very supportive of Trump. They may be in some of that category of the ones who hold hope for what's happening here. And to an extent, I can understand it. Well, to a large extent, I can understand it. We've gone through a very clear paradigm in the last 4 or 5 years, which has been about command and control. It's been about authoritarianism. And in fact, many of the detractors of Trump actually, their biggest fear is that Trump is an authoritarian figure. So that paradox is quite fascinating to watch, because you've got a group of people think he's here to advance liberty, and you've got a group who think he's authoritarian, which is, there are clashing ideologies for one. What is the truth to that? I don't know. But with that critique and with that hope, I do understand it on the basis that we have seen the current establishment very much being at the forefront of that authoritarian, anti-liberty mentality. So even if the political machinery doesn't shift as a result of Trump's inauguration, do you think there is a cultural shift that is represented by Trump and those who have aligned with him, or is that a facade?
That's a great question. And, to your point about people having hope, I totally get it as well. I'm not here to demean anybody who is, putting some hope into the coming years, because, and I think I've probably said this to you before, like my family, I always think of my brother and my sister, like very working class people who are just working 6 days, sometimes 7 days a week, trying to feed their kids, feed their family, pay their bills. And they are, somewhat aware of politics. They're not knee deep in it like maybe yourself or myself, but generally speaking, they just want gas to be cheaper. They want, less pressure in the economy. They want to not have propaganda fed to their kids in school and things like that. And so when they look at their two choices of, say, Kamala Harris, Biden, and that sort of group, and then Trump, I could see why somebody might put a little bit of hope and say, all right, well, this guy seems to be saying the right things, and he doesn't seem to be as bad as the other side, so I'll go ahead and place a vote. And they kind of check out. They don't necessarily tune into what comes afterwards, right? They're just sort of placing that vote and hoping that something will come positive later on. So I totally get that, and I don't fault anybody for falling in that. I do think, though, when you take an educated look at the situation, as I said, Trump's relationships, then there's less of a reason to be optimistic and hopeful for that. But I can totally get it and understand it. And in terms of like a cultural shift, there are things we could point at, right? Like days before this interview, as we're recording, Mark Zuckerberg puts out a video announcing that Facebook is going to back off of the sort of working with the government for censorship that we've seen during COVID 1984, but even before that, for those who are paying attention, and now says they're going to do something similar to Twitter's community notes, where people can kind of crowdsource, debunking or confirming information. I think that's an interesting take. Maybe somebody could look at that and say, look, that's a sign of a shift towards, Elon's strategies, or towards Trump I think that would be a charitable take, and we could look to other areas. I also still do have concerns about that. From another angle, looking at that same situation, we could say, okay, well, the billionaires of the world are lining up behind Trump. Not only Elon Musk, but you have Jeff Bezos of Amazon, who owns the Washington Post, and the Washington Post chose not to release an endorsement during the U.S. election, which was not unprecedented. It's happened before sometime in their 100-year history, but not recently. And many people felt like, oh, Bezos doesn't want to upset Trump by endorsing Kamala and just would rather stay out of it. And then we saw Bezos said he's going to give $1 million to Trump's inauguration. It's not a lot of money to a billionaire, but nevertheless, they're giving money to him. Same thing with Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg said he's going to give $1 million to Trump's inauguration and has kind of, seemed to go more in Trump's direction post his alleged assassination attempt. And there are others. And so I'm not just, somebody who's like against wealth just right out of the bat, like maybe some people who lean more left. But I do think we should be concerned as just regular average people when the billionaires start lining up behind somebody like Trump, who may claim he's going to do some things that people care about. Like in the US, there's, and I know in the UK as well, illegal immigration has become such a big hot topic. But when you look past those things, I think Trump is not a person that does truly care about individual liberty, or more specifically, like most people in the two-party paradigm, he cares about it when it benefits his side. But at the same time, they're happy to crush individual liberty if it's their so-called enemies, or if it's the quote-unquote other side. And I think that's what still places this MAGA movement, for whatever potential there may be, squarely within that left-right paradigm. And what I mean by that is that, for example, I wrote a couple articles right before the election. I wrote one called 4 Reasons Not to Vote for Kamala Harris, and another one called 4 Reasons Not to Vote for Donald Trump, and a third article called Election 2024, Zionist Technocrats versus Zionist Technocrats. And I just listed all the different billionaires who also happen to be supporters of Israel and the genocide, and mostly supporters of the technocratic philosophy and strategy, that were lining up behind Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And there were plenty on both sides. And in fact, there were 2 Bilderberg steering committee members on both sides. You had Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, behind Kamala Harris, and you have Peter Thiel, steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group, co-founder of Palantir, behind Donald Trump. So at the end of the day, I don't see much differences between the two. And in that article about reasons to maybe not vote for Trump or to be skeptical, I pointed out that if you actually listen to what Trump has been saying in regards to Israel and to Palestine, that Trump is promising to deport what he calls, Hamas radicals, which that label could be attached to anybody, I guess, who questions Israel, saying he's going to deport college students who question Israel, who question the war, saying that they're immediately going to make sure that Israel can get as many different weapons. Like when you start to look at the actual details and not just the sort of clips that float around on social media, or laughing because Trump says something mean to the media, or because, one of the things I'll often hear is just look at the people who hate him. And that's how we should judge him, which I don't think is a really logical metric. I mean, just because somebody is hated or allegedly hated, if we're to judge things by the things we're seeing on the screens, which I tend to be very skeptical of, even if just because someone's hated by certain people that you also dislike, doesn't mean that they have good policies. I just think that's such a weird way to judge something. So instead, I look at what has he actually said? What does the Republican Party platform actually look like under Trump? And it is very anti-free speech, which again is a central component to individual liberty. If you say the kind of things that go against his buddies, and in this case, Israel. So in many ways, sure, Trump might not be saying he's going to silence people who question the COVID shots or, the healthcare industry broadly or big pharma, but he's willing to silence people when it comes to other issues that he thinks they should be silenced for. He's saying people should be imprisoned if they disgrace the American flag, whether they burn it or stomp on it or whatever. And however people feel about that, patriotism or otherwise, it's completely legal in the United States to do such a thing, and it's protected free speech. So I really have concerns about the ways that Trump might really actually damage individual liberty.
A quick break for a word from one of our partners. In times of economic uncertainty, gold has always been used as a safe haven for wealth. It's a tangible asset that has historically held its value, even when markets were volatile. And now more than ever, it's crucial to have physical assets that can protect your wealth. That's why we've partnered with the Pure Gold Company. They offer a secure, reliable way to buy physical gold bullion and precious metals, whether you're looking to diversify your portfolio, hedge against inflation, or simply protect your savings. With fully insured gold products stored in world-class private vaults, you can rest assured that your physical gold is safe and secure. For bullion-grade gold bars and coins, the Pure Gold Company makes it easy to purchase physical gold that you can actually hold. If you're ready to take action and safeguard your wealth, then visit danastingregory.com/gold to download your free guide and take advantage of a free consultation to explore your gold bullion options. Now, let's get back to the show.
Just one last point on this that I've noticed, and maybe this is just the world we live in, Dan. I mean, I don't know. It kind of makes me sad, but I've noticed that people, at least I'll say in the US, Americans seem willing to say, okay, Trump might be a Zionist. Okay, he might be promising to do some things that affect other countries, but as long as my gas is cheap, then I'm okay with it. Like there's just this really kind of like narrow tunnel vision of, which on one hand I get, like, you know, you have to feed your family, you're dealing with your, what they call dinner plate issues, right? Like how much does food cost? How much does gas cost? All that stuff. And it seems like if you can create a space where Americans, or just let's say the domestic population, is satisfied in that front, then they will make excuses and let you do whatever else you want elsewhere. Like as long as they can say, hey, well, my food's cheap and my gas is cheap. I love Trump. Trump's good. Okay, he's starting wars elsewhere, or he's doing this thing, or he's Zionism. Okay, and I've heard all the excuses. Like, so that kind of saddens me in a way. Not to say that people shouldn't care about how much their food costs and things like that, but I don't know. I can't get it out of my mind of just thinking about, okay, well, at least my life is okay, and I'm going to ignore the rest of the world. If they're suffering because I voted for this president or this person, at least my internal, most immediate world is fine. And that kind of saddens me to see that.
Yeah, it's a tough one though, Derek, because actually in my 20s and going into my 30s, I consciously made a decision to eliminate media from my life. So I sold my television, I didn't read newspapers, and I became blissfully unaware in a lot of ways. Now, it's impossible to avoid what's going on in the world because there's always someone talking about something. You overhear conversations, your friends will bring things up. And it was probably the most uninformed period of my life. But at the same time, it was some of the most joyful periods of my life because I didn't concern myself with the state of the world. I concerned myself with the state of my own reality, which was necessary at the time. I was kind of in my early 20s and kind of figuring out who I was as a man. But now I'm the opposite. I've probably gone too far the other way. I'm consuming so much information that it comes at the sacrifice of my own joy and well-being. So I think to me, it's like striking that balance between, yes, finding a way to actually have a decent quality of life. And I think the other lesson I've learned during that period, though, Derek, actually, from that withdrawal from the kind of political game at that period of my life, was that actually the illusion that politics actually contributes to our well-being, because that's the fallacy, because a lot of people, I saw a tweet the other day that I've mirrored in an article, which was that there is no president or politician that is going to make you happier, healthier, or wealthier. They may create some conditions in the economics through different policy decisions that might make it easier, but ultimately your own happiness, your own health, and your own wealth is down to you. And that, I think, is something we've lost. And I'd like to come back to that point. But striking that balance now between being informed, like truly informed as well, with a critical thought, rather than just getting caught up in whatever sway. Because the other thing that came to my mind as you were speaking, Derek, was that, yes, that part around, they're speaking positively about things that may have changed economically or politically as a result of it, a single politician. But they are now also talking about things that they're basically told to talk about. Like you said, you wake up and it's the new cause, the new issue. And it's like a friend of mine is in fashion, and she said that, it used to be like annual trends. Then it was like seasonal trends. Then it was quarterly trends. And it was monthly trends. And it's weekly trends. And now it's daily. So the trend is changing daily in order to make more sales. And it's the same in the news cycle. It's like, we have a different flavor. They used to say it was the flavor of the month. It's like the flavor of the day. And those people are now getting involved in these discussions without even realizing. And I caught myself in it in the last 24 hours. Like, well, I've never even paid attention to this issue. Why is it now like causing outrage in me? So
yeah, I've had that experience in the past where just, I realized as a content creator, as a journalist, I don't have to comment on everything. I don't need to be expected to say, just because something's trending and everybody else is doing videos about it, because there are those channels, which is obviously different from what you're doing and what I do, that just do the daily grind. Whatever's happened that day on, the mainstream news or trending on social media, they're going to do videos about it. And great, more power to you. And sometimes you feel a pull, and especially for those of us who are like, we talked about earlier, like you're concerned about shadow banning, you want to reach more people, right? That's our goal, obviously. And sometimes the way to reach people is to talk about the hot topics. But that in itself can be this kind of trap where you're just constantly in that cycle. Like, I have to keep up with what's going on. And so I've learned over the years, to my best of my abilities, to not let myself get sucked into it. But to your point you were making a moment ago, I definitely have had that experience in the last week where I had to pull back and just like, oh my God, I haven't felt this overwhelmed in a while. I'm trying to keep up with like this topic's trending. Everybody's talking about this, and there's, this video. And I had to step off. I was just like, I don't need to keep up with all of it. I've got my goals. I've got my focus. I have things I can contribute here and there, but I don't need to say something on every single topic that comes up.
Yeah. So the next question I have for you is relating to those 3 posts you put out. And I recall seeing those actually, and I was curious to see the comments. Which one got the most attention?
Well, the thing is that people seem to be, the posts that get the most attention are the ones that tend to be trending. I've noticed this, that like, I actually was lamenting this on Facebook as well, because, across the platforms we get different reach, right? And Twitter obviously is a lot of attention right now. Facebook and other platforms maybe seem to be dying. But I noticed that if I post a picture of myself and my partner, Miriam, pictures, or you post a picture of your family, people like to see that, right? You can post well thought out articles or videos and interviews, and sometimes that'll get attention. But I mean, I don't know. A lot of times we put in all this effort and it really doesn't get the response that we want. And I think that can be demoralizing. You start to feel like nobody's listening, nobody's paying attention. Again, we have to think about the algorithm. But I just don't like the fact, it really frustrates me that I've noticed over the years, and I know we've had the same conversation, that we can do a video or an interview or a podcast, short, long, whatever, about a solution that can revolutionize somebody's world, and it'll get 10 clicks compared to a video about, here are the problems, that Jeffrey Epstein or this horrible thing. And unfortunately, those are the things that seem to generate the clicks. And I don't like feeding into that and contributing into that. And like I said, kind of being on that treadmill of trying to just chase the clicks and chase the algorithm and chase the dopamine and all these sort of things. And I also don't like feeling like I'm giving that to other people at home, right? Like that my friends and family around the world, that I'm just, okay, cool, today I got 1 million views, but did I contribute anything to their lives, or did I just give them more reason to be sad and upset? And that doesn't mean we should shy away from the truth, obviously, and ignore the facts of life and reality. But I do think that, more thought could go into that. And it's unfortunate to see some people go down that road. I mean, everybody has their own path, but I tell you that I don't click on channels once I notice that every other day their video has red alert or emergency or red flag or civil war or whatever in it. And there are some people that's the route they've gone. They think that's the best way for them to generate clicks and revenue, perhaps. And I've been trying to remind the audience, maybe to my own detriment, that there are people out there trying to monetize your fear, monetize your anger. And, you can either fall into that trap and make them a lot of money while they scare the crap out of you, or you can step back from it and look for better sources of information. Or like you said earlier, maybe there are times when we need to unplug. I mean, I took my first social media break back in November for a whole month, and I haven't done that in 6 or 7 years. And it used to be a regular thing that I would do every couple months because of just for my own mental sanity and health. But as you know, as the work grows, there's always another interview to promote, another event to promote. There's this thing, and there's this thing, and I got this, and there's just, it never ends. So I came to the point where I'm like, I'm going to quit soon if I don't literally allow myself just to unplug and stop checking Twitter every day and stop, feeling the need to crank out videos and whatever else and do this and just be present in my own world and what I care about. And I think that's important for sanity. So I know that means I'm probably losing in the algorithm game. And there's that part of my mind that's like, oh man, I see other people growing, and maybe if I just put 10x all my work, then I'll get there. But at the same time, we both know that our mental health suffers.
Yeah, well, I took a break over Christmas at the time, as I've now found from the trail of messages from you where I disappeared, when you vanished, did a detox.
But I totally get it, man. I totally understand why.
Yeah, I want to sharpen my question a little bit, because actually I did a double kind of circle back, because you said you'd posted those 3 posts about the 4 reasons why you should not vote for Trump. one for Kamala, and then the third was about Zionist elite versus Zionist elite. Which of those three posts got the most engagement? Which one?
I would the Zionist technocrats definitely got a lot of interest. Of course, questioning the election right around the election time doesn't make you a popular person on either side, because people they feel like it's blasphemy. Anybody who's been following my work over the last 15 years wasn't surprised by my positions, and it wasn't just. And the reason I felt the need to write those articles, not only as a journalist, as a researcher, because I think it's important to have some facts, and I didn't want to just be like, yeah, screw the elections, don't bother, check out. Well, here's some reasons. Here's 4 reasons that you shouldn't trust Kamala. Here's 4 reasons not to trust Trump. I think that there was more pushback on the one on Trump, for sure. People are happy to look at anything negative related to the quote unquote other side. And this kind of, to me, gets to the bigger point of the fact that I think the broader freedom movement now associates, and has for a few years now, itself with the MAGA movement. And that's not what in my mind, those are totally separate movements. I think the MAGA people, like we said, there's good people there, positive, hopes and intentions. And there's a lot of people who are blind worshipers of Trump, but there are also just average people. Like I said, my brother-in-law, somebody I think of who probably did vote for Trump, but isn't a hardcore political kind of guy. He's just like, yeah, well, Trump's not talking about that transgender stuff, so that's, he's going to make my gas cheaper, like those kind of things. And I don't know, to me though, I think a lot of the MAGA movement lacks principles and a foundation in principles, and not just them, but I mean, just focusing on them for a moment, because I think we're even seeing this lately. There's this conversation going on right now, Trump talking about renaming the Gulf of Mexico and making Canada part of the US and making Greenland part of it and taking the Panama Canal and all this kind of stuff, which, we can get into the whole similarities between the, what that map looks like and what the globalists have talked about, North American Union and things like that, and how the technocrat movement of the 1930s wanted something like that. They called it the North American Technate. But setting those things aside, there's people in that movement who I think, because they lack firm principles, if anything was supposed to guide them, I guess it's MAGA, Make America Great Again, right? But obviously you can twist and view that from all kinds of different lenses. Some people would say, well, Trump is actually MEGA, Make Israel Great Again, and I think that's a fair point. But I think that because some of these people came about with Trump, and they also, a lot of people woke up during COVID, they don't necessarily have a philosophical foundation and a rooting in what they actually even believe in. Instead, it's more of a reaction. And I think this can be dangerous in any movement. So as an example, COVID happens, shot mandates, all the craziness stuff, right? And there was a lot of people who wouldn't have considered themselves freedom fighters, activists, awake, any of that kind of stuff prior. But then COVID starts happening and they're like, whoa, this is crazy. This is too much. So they have a reaction. They're like, what those people are doing, that doesn't line up with what I know is good. That's crazy. I'm not going to be forced to be shot and get a shot. I'm not going to wear a mask, whatever. So they have a reaction, and that reaction causes them to kind of wake up and start questioning the world. And then they find other people, and maybe some of those people are Trump people and conspiracy theorists and what have you. But in that process, how many of those people have then had, the sort of like the education of, but what is it that I do believe in? If I know I don't believe in their vision of the world, I don't like Agenda 2030, and I'm reacting to that and saying, no, thank you. But what do you actually stand for? And I think there's a big difference between being against things and being for something, so you can be against all kinds of things. I'm against shots. I'm against mandates. I'm against my bodily autonomy being violated. But what are you for? What are the principles that guide you? What is the foundation that you have? And if you don't have that, then it's very easy, especially around election time, to be swayed, okay, well, this person's saying all the right things. And of course, politicians will promise you the moon when it's time to run for office. I don't think any of their words in those, the periods of the campaign should be trusted, really. But so I think that's one of the problems that I see, is that a lot of this kind of MAGA movement, which does overlap with the broader freedom truth movement, that a lot of those folks don't have any foundation and principles or really understanding what they are for. It's this kind of vague, broad concept of Make America Great Again, but that is being twisted in all kinds of ways. Apparently, Making America Great Again means to go colonize other nations, and to expand the U.S. empire, or to send billions of dollars to Israel, or to put technocrats in the White House who have said that their agendas really are much different than Making America Great Again. And so I think that's one of the big problems I see too, is that there was a reaction, which is a positive thing. People are waking up, they're questioning, but then because of this fast-paced world we're talking about, everything's trending every day. How many people have taken the breaks and stepped away and said, let me really think about what it is I do stand for and what my principles are and my values are? Instead, it's just like, we got to push back. It's the crazy Democrats, and those are only the bad people, but our side is the good ones. And anything that comes from our side, we can't question. And that's, of course, when we start getting into cultish mentalities. And I do think that not every Trump supporter, so, don't be offended, but some people for sure are absolutely living in a cult-like mentality that it's not okay to question. And I'll just give one brief example. I don't pay attention to the mainstream politics too much, but there was a big thing last week where the new Speaker of the House in the United States, Mike Johnson, he's up for nomination. Do the Republicans have enough votes to make it happen, et cetera, et cetera? It's like this mainstream drama. But the main point here is that previously all the MAGA people were against this guy, Mike Johnson. They thought him being put into the position of Speaker was a complete selling out. And in fact, he'd done so many different things. He sided with the Democrats. He was against the MAGA movement. But now, when Trump says, hey, I want to keep him, all of a sudden, all those people are like, anybody who's against Mike Johnson is the enemy. And the only person who really voted against him was Thomas Massie, who I think is, as far as politicians go, probably the most principled person still in politics in the United States. He was the only one to say, do you guys not remember everything this guy had done before? Like, I'm not voting for him. I'm a hell no matter what. And he stuck with his principles. And he's getting a lot of hate from people who are like, how dare he not follow the party line? Like, that's what it really comes down to. And I think that's the danger, whether we're talking MAGA, progressivism, anything. Like, if you can't question even the movements we're involved in, if you can't ask questions and have a different opinion, we should be able to have healthy discussion and say, hey, I think you're wrong based on X, Y, and Z. But if you're in a group, any sort of in-group that says saying something different than the rest of us means you're the bad person or you're a danger, I think you need to question the people you're surrounding yourself with.
Yeah, and I already know during the course of this conversation, Derek, that there'll be people that are triggered by what you and I have talked about, or what you have said, or what I've said, and they may then decide to tune out. They may then decide to hate on one of us, and it's like, well, hang on, how do we get to that point where we're hating on the individual rather than the idea? So we have to distinguish between the two things, because we don't have to agree. In fact, actually, this morning I posted in my our supporter community that I wanted to be clear to our members, because they've paid to support our show. They have no need to agree with me on anything. It's like, don't feel uncomfortable disagreeing in that environment, because we've created an environment where we can't disagree. And I think that's part of the problem, Derek, because I do actually think there's a lot of us right now out there who are actually taking that principled view. But actually what makes it difficult is to actually communicate those principles when you live in such a tribalized, polarized environment, where you are going to get people of either side jump on you with intensity, which will probably already be happening in the comments for this one, because I know that there's a lot of Trump supporters in the freedom movement. You and I are both, strong proponents of the freedom movement. And as a result, we will be on their radar for what we're saying. And I think that's the important thing to bring it back to. What are those principles and what draws it alive? And I want to totally be clear on, in the UK here, when it came to our election last year, faced with the choice of, re-electing the Conservatives, who have completely ransacked the country over the period of over a decade, versus Keir Starmer, like, that is a losing battle for me. I can't choose either of those two. So then I was heavily, I would say people were very much in the manipulative place, saying, you've got to vote for Nigel, you've got to vote for the reform. I'm like, I don't want to vote for Nigel. I don't want to vote for the reform. I don't think they actually represent me. And even that upset a lot of people. It's like, my path has always been politically homeless. I've always been politically engaged, but I have a different view on how we can actually create transformation in society. Yet the pressure was like, well, you can't be part of the liberty movement. You can't be serious about freedom. But I also understand that mentality, because, like, of the choice, if I was to just take some sound bites of all three different political paradigms, there would have been things that were being spoken about by reform that were more freedom orientated. Did I believe it was genuine in every case? No. But if I had to choose between that, and that, if it was just like a mystery wine tour and it was just choose your politician based upon a soundbite, then, I would choose the most liberty sounding soundbite. But I was not drawn to any one of those parties. But if I look at the US, if I was stuck in the US and it was like, do I vote for another Biden-Harris orientated versus Trump? I can understand the draw to voting away from the blues. But the problem is you've only got two choices. and or the perception, the illusion of two choices, I think, which is the issue, which, you know, I think want to come down to it for our conclusion for this discussion is, you know, what is the third choice? You know, how do you actually choose a non-political path? But before we get to that, there's another piece that relates to principles that I'd love to discuss with you, because this is another one where I felt very uncomfortable. And this is a very good example of an issue that I know has been swept under the carpet because of the inflamed responses. So alongside the association with the MAGA movement, with the freedom movement, you know, Musk has very much become aligned with that freedom movement on the basis that he bought X, and actually very favorably liberated a lot of Twitter. I mean, my account is not liberated. I'm still censored. I'm doing all these censorship experiments to try and find my way through. And actually going to try and get hold of Matt Taibbi to say, look, we need a global Twitter files, we need a global Facebook files, we need a global YouTube files, because our politicians suck as much as yours. But nonetheless, you know, there was a lot of positive goodwill as a result of that liberation of, quite frankly, the first mover effect of the mainstream platforms. But on the same token, having a lot of people rallied against the elite capture of politics, in the next moment, when you get a photo of Elon Musk on a private jet with Bobby Kennedy and Donald Trump, 5 minutes ago, if that had been Biden, Zuckerberg, and any other notable figure, they would have been outraged that the social media tech elite are getting too close to politics. So what frustrates me principally is, you know, the rally against elite capture blows of the wind of wherever you know, the views of your own lies. So if you know, there is an elite that aligns with your worldview and they happen to be playing an increasingly strong role technocratically with the government, you'll cheer it on because it suits your agenda at that time. That principle that you held is no longer a principle if it only works if it's benefiting the other team. So I want to hear your thoughts on that, because that to me is a red flag. And again, I want to be balanced on it. I'm delighted that people are out there pushing for free speech. You know, the degree of which free speech exists and the absolutism and whatnot, massive discussion. But what's your take on this piece around Elon Musk? You know, the support that he's had, and it's not limited to Musk. You know, we've got Peter Thiel, all these different people, like you say, that are jumping on the red train, the red pill. You know, what's your take on this elite capture that seemingly people are turning a blind eye to?
You make a good point there, and you said the perfect word, team. My friend Ryan with The Last American Vagabond refers to this as team sport politics, because it is this sort of thing like where, like you said, if the other side does it, it's bad and we criticize it. But if our team does it, well, it's good and we're smart and we're so savvy for learning how to use these tools. And I think that's just, you know, goes back to the having a lack of principles. In terms of Elon, you're right. I mean, there was a lot of goodwill that was built up, or at least, you know, people were ready to embrace Elon because they said, hey, well, he came and bought Twitter and he released these files and he's showing us that he actually cares. And he said it's going to be the new town square and free speech and all this stuff. Now, in recent days and weeks, people are starting to question that and maybe think perhaps they've fallen for another trap by trusting this billionaire technocrat that he was going to, you know, just liberate everything and liberate everybody. You know, to one simple point, Elon Musk said very early on that the Twitter X algorithm was going to be open source. That is yet to happen. There, you know, it's not open source. People can't still, they keep announcing changes from day to day through his account, and there's really no accountability for that. And for a lot of people, that feels very similar to Facebook, to YouTube, et cetera. Some billionaire making an announcement that, hey, today we're going to silence this topic or this thing, or we're going to shut down these accounts, and a lack of transparency, a lack of accountability. So I think that, I don't think that there's going to be a billionaire technocrat that's going to come save us. I feel like probably this sort of mindset probably wouldn't have been able to flourish until this point, where people have lost faith in institutions, which on one hand I celebrate, but on another hand, I see how that can really, you know, destabilize society when nobody can trust anything. There's a really infamous quote that goes around, and it's, you know, it's the source I think is accurate and reputable, but you know, it's questionable whether it was actually said. But something to the effect was said by the former CIA director William Casey, that we'll know our disinformation campaign is complete when they can't tell truth from lies. I think whether that was exactly what he said or something to that effect, that's what we're living through now. The average person, and you could also go back and look at the Bilderberg group from 2017. They had their meeting that year. One of the topics they listed was the post-truth world. I think we are now living in the post-truth world, and you don't even have to bring up AI and video and audio fakery, deep fakes, etc. That adds a whole nother component to this, an element to it. But generally speaking, people don't know who to trust or what to trust. If you're a mainstream kind of person that follows government advice, then your experts are at the CDC and the NHS and things like that. If you're a person that questions things, your experts might come from social media or from podcasts or wherever else. And not to say that that can't be factual. My point is, though, is that people have kind of just, I've been calling this the fracturing for a number of years. Like, the world is starting to fracture based on the information you consume, the food you consume, because obviously that's going to affect your health and your mental health. Whether you get a vaccine or not, there's all these different ways that we're seeing us kind of breaking off. And even within the broader, again, the freedom movement of those of us who question the mainstream, we're seeing division and separating, fracturing based on the narrative that you choose to believe in. So I think that this state of being where people are willing to accept that, okay, he's the good billionaire that's on our side. Elon Musk is fighting all those other bad billionaires that we know are trying to use big tech to control us. He's the one that's going to liberate us and get us to Mars and all these kinds of big ideas. And I get it. I get people get excited about the big ideas, like we're going to go to Mars, and they just like the idea to see somebody, is that rich, and they're trying to think of big things to take us to the future and to make America great, et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time, he plays video games and he shares memes. He's just like one of us, right? Like, I think, to me, that's kind of narrative crafting, but I don't think we would have got to that point unless the institutions and the faith and trust in those institutions, which I think should be, shaken. Until that was shaken and maybe completely lost, people lose faith in government. And then who steps into that role? Well, a billionaire who is promising that he's going to fix everything with all of his technological tools and his intelligence, et cetera. That is the exact sort of strategy and the philosophy of the technocrats, that politics is no longer working, that voting doesn't work, government can't fix things, and instead we need the scientific and technological elite to micromanage society, to essentially plan society. And as we know from the original technocracy movement, it included things like energy credits. It included creating this North American technate that, as I said earlier, looks very similar to what Trump is proposing now. So I do think that this has been a long game that has been unfolding here on the people. I call this the great inversion. I have an essay on my website. People can read that if they want to learn more about that. Essentially just a false awakening, tricking people to think that we've won, the freedom movement's won, Trump has, won office now maha, everything's about to be great. And we can just sit back. We don't have to take care of our own lives anymore. We don't have to actually start trying to think about exiting from the slavery systems that we see are incoming. Instead, we can just trust Elon and trust Trump. Pay no attention to the fact that Elon also promotes transhumanism, also promotes merging with the AI in order to survive the coming potential threat, also promotes brain chips and technocracy, very similar to people like Klaus Schwab and others, which I think the freedom movement doesn't stand for, doesn't agree with. All of that causes me great confusion to see like how people embracing it. I wrote an article recently called "You Can't Hide," outlining how Elon Musk, along with Starlink, the military side of Starlink is called Starshield. We've only just started to learn about it in the last year. They signed a $1.8 billion classified contract with the U.S. government, specifically the agency known as the National Reconnaissance Office, which deals with satellites. And their goal is to put, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of low Earth satellites all around the world. And in my article, I point to the fact that the current head of the NRO, he recently gave a speech and said that because of Elon and the collaboration through SpaceX and Starshield with the U.S. military and intelligence, that they're building the world's largest spy satellite network in the world that's going to be able to allow them to get even more high definition pictures of anywhere in the world. And the title, "You Can't Hide," comes from him, where he said, there will be nowhere to hide. Now, of course, he's saying it just in terms of bad guys like terrorists and criminals, but that same technology can be used against us. And so when I look at somebody like Elon and I see the fact that his entire wealth is dependent on US military and intelligence contracts, and that he's promoting many of the same agendas as the World Economic Forum that so many people have opposed over the last 4 going on 5 years, And then again, all the various connections he has going back to the PayPal mafia, Peter Thiel, things like that. Elon Musk's bio on Tesla calls himself the techno king, and the technocratic movement, they said that the ruler of the technate, the North American technate, would be the technocratic king. And you can also just look at what was the goal of the original PayPal mafia that Peter Thiel and Elon Musk were a part of, and David Sachs and many other people who are now been nominated for Trump's cabinet. They said their goal was to turn PayPal into the new world currency. And now they're all getting behind Bitcoin. And I mean, that goes into a whole other topic. But my point is that a lot of the agendas and things that they are involved in and promoting are not things that are going to lead to individual liberty, that are not going to make it easier for us to thrive and survive and make our own choices. It's going to make it much more difficult because we are going to be surveilled to the max like we've never seen before. And obviously those agendas were already progressing, but this idea that choosing Elon and choosing Trump is somehow getting away from those same agendas, it's not accurate. And we could debate all day about, well, it's better than at least Kamala Harris getting in there. And the truth is, none of us know. We have no idea. That's a silly debate to have because we'll never know. I argue that in fact it might be worse that Trump won, because a lot of freedom-minded people who do trust Trump are now going to be pacified, and they're going to say, well, look, I'll just trust Trump. I'll trust the plan. There's still a lot of those people around as well. Elon's in control. Trump's in power. RFK's there. They're doing all the work. So I don't need to worry about my own life now. I can let them and just trust them. But if Kamala had won, there probably would be more resistance to these different issues that I think we're going to still see progress under Trump and Musk.
So you're a fan of Musk then?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I've got my Twitter hat right up there.
Well, but he hates on the same people I hate on, Derrick. So that comes back to your point. I mean, I think this is where it comes down to. But it does beg another question around the way that we evaluate these things, because I also feel like, and I kind of jest about he hates on at the moment he's waging war on Starmer, and again, I've had to kind of consciously think about my own response to my feelings towards the political game in the UK, because I found myself hating on Starmer. I'm like, no, hang on a minute. Come back to your principle of don't hate the individual, hate the idea. There are things that he stands for that I thoroughly disregard and actually find abhorrent. There are things that he does that I find disgraceful. But at the same time, like I need to make sure I'm not conflating that with hatred for the individual. It's easy to do. So when Musk is tweeting along, there's part of me that's like cheering along. But at one point, actually, it got so much. I mean, I don't know how this. I mean, I'm running 3 projects at the moment, and I've got no time of it. I don't know how he's tweeting like 400 times a day or whatnot. Like, I really don't know how he's doing that, or if he's doing that himself. But at one point, I was like, as much as I dislike what Starmer's doing, I'm like, it feels like a pylon. At some point, it's like, it starts to feel like bullying. It's like, is this the way to win a political argument? Which actually comes back to a more serious point about his overall influence on domestic US policy and global policies, which comes back to a principle of elite capture of these institutions and of the global agenda. So it doesn't matter if the wind of change is blowing in your favor or not. You're either for the principle or against it. And that's where I feel very uncomfortable right now. I can equally have an admiration for his ability to start a company and scale it as an entrepreneur myself, whilst also looking at his role in this thing, which comes to the question I have for you, Derrick. Do we need, as the state of reality in society at the minute, need to be able to objectively look at something and say, you know what, I actually agree with what he's saying over there and what he's doing, but fundamentally I disagree with the way he's doing this? Because it feels like we live in a culture of, like that point you said, you support someone because they hate the same things as you. We're not looking at like the things that actually they may do good that you do agree with. Is there a better balance that we can strike to actually say, well, you know what, those things, very positive. These things, really disagree on that. But I look at the whole, not just that thing. Like you've already illustrated it wonderfully in this conversation. Giving credit where credit's due. But do we need to get better at that as a movement, as an individual, as a society, to recognize the merit as well as what's not right?
I think that's a fair point, and yeah, I mean, the short answer is I think, yeah, we all could get better at that. And yeah, I mean, I'm on Twitter. I'll see something Elon says go by, and sure, there are times when I'm like, hey, he's bringing up some important point. I've talked about that issue, or yeah, I'm glad more people are seeing that, right? And I can acknowledge that, and at the same time, I can still maintain my skepticism and my questioning of the other pieces of the puzzle, and and I think that maybe there are limitations to that though too, because generally speaking, what you're calling for is nuanced, critical thinking, being able to hold two conflicting thoughts at once and say, okay, this guy does this bad thing, but hey, on this other hand, I can point to something positive. And I'll just give an example. Like I've had people say that to me about Trump as well. They'll be like, "You have Trump derangement syndrome. You just all you say is just negative stuff about Trump." And even to the point of saying, so for example, one of the big issues that I care about that Trump has promised to do on Inauguration Day, so just on January 20th, not far from now, is to free Ross Ulbricht. And Ross Ulbricht, without getting into the whole situation, he is, from my perspective and many people's perspective, a political prisoner who's been locked up for over a decade in the United States. And he is a big figure in the Bitcoin community as well. And so he came to the Libertarian Convention last May and said, I'm going to free Ross Ulbricht on day one, commute his sentence. And so a lot of people voted for him just on that. There's a lot of Bitcoiners and libertarians who are like, all right, you know what? I'll ignore the other stuff about Trump if it frees Ross, because, that's one victory. I have been friends with Ross's family since the very beginning. I was reporting on the trial in 2013, 2015, but I could not bring myself to vote for Donald Trump, even if it was for the slight potential that he may actually keep his word, because I'm very skeptical of this man who is a known liar. We could talk about Julian Assange, and I have no idea who's WikiLeaks. I don't know anything about WikiLeaks, right? There's a lot of reason to be skeptical for that. So for me, I still couldn't bring myself to say, all right, you know what, for Ross, I'm going to vote for him, because even if it's the slightest chance, like I need to make sure that happens. Some people, they did, they made that compromise. And the argument I was making is like, look, I hear you. Trust me. We all want Ross to be freed. I want his mother to have her son back. They're counting the days. They're praying. They don't necessarily agree with Trump on everything. They just want their son back, and who could fault them for that, right? I think we could all, especially those who are parents, probably could imagine the heartache of watching your child locked up for over a decade and wanting to do anything to get them back, right? But for me, I still couldn't do what I consider to be a compromise, because I think there are some limitations to the state of mind that you brought up, that yes, we should be able to say, okay, if Trump frees Ross on January 20th, great, I'll give him credit for that. But that doesn't mean I'm going to excuse the Zionism. I'm going to excuse the list of other things that we can expect to see and that we have seen in the past, Operation Warp Speed, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think we need to turn a blind eye to somebody's, potentially anti-liberty actions just because they might do one or two good things. So I do think there's a limitation to that sort of way of thinking. But generally speaking, I do think we should be able to have a level of nuance and say, okay, look, Elon, he did this, he allegedly did this good thing, but let's still hold his feet to the fire. And I think that is my other concern, is that for a lot of people, they just, the game, their level of responsibility ends after they vote. Like, I did my part, I voted, and now I have no responsibility for any actions that take place after that. That's been always my big problem. People will come at me and say, you're a non-voter. If Kamala wins, it's your fault. Or if Trump wins, it's your fault, whoever they wish I would have voted for. And they act as if, I can't say anything. I have no right to complain or something like that. But I think if you're a voter, you should be held responsible for the actions of the person you put in office. Instead of just going and pressing the button on one day and then going about your lives like a lot of people are. They're fair weather political people who just come and vote and pay attention when the TV tells them to or when the social media tells them to. And meanwhile, they totally check out and have no responsibility for anything negative that comes after the fact. I think it should be the opposite way, that people, not to say legally be held accountable, but that people should be responsible and should acknowledge, you know what, I voted for this person and I did so because he was going to free Ross. But you know what, he's bombing Palestinian children and killing families, and I played a role in that because I voted for that person. So I do think that, generally speaking, what you're saying is important for us to have that level of nuance. And I also think there are limitations in what we should accept in terms of that.
I agreed. I mean, I don't know for certain, but Hitler was probably nice to his mother, and it just because he was nice to his mother doesn't mean you wouldn't support him in other areas. It's if they vehemently flout your principles and values, then the fact that they said something positive about something you care about shouldn't mean that you should therefore support them. But I think it's just that wider acknowledgement that, you know, when we're evaluating these ideas, it's how do we holistically evaluate the things to come to our conclusions. And I think that's the part I think is absent. It's going with whatever the tide is going with. And what's fascinating about that is, you know, I think it's the lack of alternatives, which is what I want to talk about now, because I've got a lot of my friends in this movement. You know, they won't publicly necessarily state it in this environment because of the way that the political winds are shifting. But I describe a lot of the people in this movement as part of what I would describe as the lost left. You know, they historically were left-wing voters or left-wing orientated, but they've completely lost faith in the left side of politics, and now they've gravitated due to lack of alternatives to the right. And, you know, whilst they wouldn't necessarily identify as far right, you know, that's a classic smear that we're just seeing. You know, in private conversations, they're saying, Dan, you know, I would never say this publicly, but I've voted for Trump. Or, you know, like 5 years ago, the person 5 years ago, I would have been like, raging at myself if I'd done that. But like, it's the lack of alternatives, which mean that, you know, we now see all these people being described as far right or, you know, right wing, when actually they're not. They just don't have a viable alternative, and therefore, you know, rejecting the left is seen as some sort of, you know, move to the right, where actually may have not moved at all. So what is the alternative? But in fact, before we talk about the alternative, you know, as a third way, do you believe that some level of political engagement is still required? And I draw back to your point that if Kamala had been elected, if Kamala had been elected, that many people would have continued to fight for the issues that they stand for, on the assumption that she would have been contrary to those libertarian or liberty-orientated ideas. Do we still need that level of political engagement to break free politically, or is that a distraction and a waste of time in your view?
In my view, it is, generally speaking, a waste of time. And I think I've shared this with you prior, but for those who don't know me or my work, I did run for political office twice in my hometown of Houston, Texas, in 2019 and in 2023, so not so long ago. And I did so not with the assumption that if I was somehow to win this office, which I knew was a long shot already, that I was going to be able to solve all of the 4 million plus people who live in that area's problems or anything of that fact. I did so because I do think there are times when getting involved in the political system, in running for office or campaigning or spreading a message that way, that it can be an avenue for those things. So by filling out some paperwork and signing some documents and making myself an official candidate for the position of mayor, it opened up doors for me. It opened up, I was getting on TV. I was getting on the radio. I was getting invited on local podcasts in Houston. I was getting invited to retirement communities to speak to older voters. I was getting invited to high schools to speak to younger voters. I was getting invited to poor neighborhoods and rich neighborhoods and Republican groups and Democrat groups. It opened up a lot of doors for me to share the topics and the message that I care about, including bodily autonomy, things related to health, as far as getting fluoride out of the water and 5G and a lot of other topics that I've worked on in the past. That is pretty much the only way that I will ever engage with the political system. I probably would never do that again. But the reason I chose to do so was because it felt like in 2019, when I was running, it felt like this is one of the only ways I'm going to get myself heard beyond the things I had been doing prior. Prior to that, and still to this day, I would go to city council and just try to, educate the local council and say, hey, here's some studies about fluoride, or have you heard about this thing going on in our backyard, or here's this homeless issue we have, and maybe here's some ideas. And I did that for a long enough time to realize they don't care. They're not listening. You can show up and get your 2 to 3 minutes to speak and waste your breath, and they're pretty much just going to be staring at their phones the whole time and ignore you. So after a while of
they're told by the party to care, in which case then they care.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, so they know which topics are like, okay, if it's in this little box, those are the issues we care about. So when somebody comes up there speaking about something outside of those sort of preordained, pre-selected issues, they just kind of ignore you. And I did that enough to realize that, for one, I would go to city council, and after a while, like I said, I'd be ignored. I realized, okay, well, the best outcome from this I can do is to take the video from the city website and upload it to my channels, where it'll get dozens and dozens, and sometimes one of my videos got 1 million views from going to city council. And just a 5-minute video talking to the city council they resonated with it, right? And so I sort of used it more as like a propaganda technique to spread the message, not because I expected the council to care or to do anything. And for the most part, that has been my experience. That's not to say that you might have a different experience in a much smaller city, a much smaller town or village, because obviously a city the size of 4 million people, unfortunately, I think a city that big is probably corrupted to the point where the players are already there. They already know each other. People from the oil industry, the politicians, they're all buddy buddy. And if you're an outsider to that group, there's really nobody who's even giving you the time of day or treating you like a serious candidate. Nevertheless, though, I think real change can happen in politics on the local level, but beyond that, I really don't give it much weight, like voting in the federal elections, the presidential elections. Instead, I do think that we need to put energy into our own lives and the way we live our lives and the way that we carry ourselves, and that's really where I try to put my focus, because I do think that having watched, I just turned 40, right? So I've got friends 20 years older than me who are activists, 30 years older than me who are activists, and some of them still believe in the political system, which just boggles my mind, because I can't understand how you could watch more than a handful of elections and believe that you're really having some major impact. So I am one of these people who is, generally speaking, apolitical, outside of the caveats I just mentioned, that if I feel like there's a reason to get involved locally, and I would say, like, take it even more local, like the school board, your local, town council, et cetera, somewhere where you can maybe have more of an impact. And I've emphasized this before, because sometimes we're so focused on the international, worldwide level. What's the World Economic Forum doing? What's the United Nations talking about? But it's important for people to recognize that while those institutions, like Dan, we went to the Summit of the Future, we see the white papers and all the documents that the UN produces, but those ideas, the UN has no power to really enforce them. What happens is those white papers and those documents, they trickle down, and then some politician on the state or province level or the city and village level picks up those ideas and they start implementing them, and that's how you end up with Oxford, with low traffic zones and things like that. So if we're going to try to push back against some of these concerns we have, really the place to do it is locally, not to get distracted and lost in like arguing over which presidential or prime minister candidate might come and save the day and fix all your problems, because that's not realistic. That's not going to happen. Even if we were to believe that Donald Trump was an angel who really is fighting against the deep state and the new world order and has all of our best intentions, he alone cannot solve all of our problems. So even if you take that most charitable and I think out of touch perspective, he's not going to fix all your problems. Any other candidate's not going to fix your problems. We have to step up to the plate and try to take some of our own sovereignty back and take personal responsibility for our lives, I think is what it really comes down to.
Yeah, so I want to talk about the alternatives now. And, having first attended the People's Reset, at the time, the Greater Reset in Mexico, almost this time last year, now 12 months ago, and then worked with you to bring the People's Reset to the United Kingdom for the first time, the first European event. I've seen firsthand the practical realities of and the successes of the exit and build strategy that you've become known for in terms of helping people from exit from these kind of technocratic systems and build new realities. Certainly on the individual level, I've seen so many people find freedom for themselves by exiting from these different realities and creating new ones. My question to you, I suppose, as someone who's not such a veteran on these issues as yourself, is how does that individual exit and build strategy start to go beyond the individual? And before you answer that, I just, for those who are hearing this term exit and build, think, what's he talking about? Could you just give kind of a flavor of, what that represents, what it really means, and what some of the strategies are, so they've got context to when I'm saying people are finding freedom? What does that really mean?
So the phrase exit and build, it's a strategy that, it's a term that I coined based on, some of my inspirations. It comes from my book, How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, which everybody can download at theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. There's a free PDF download. There's a free audio book. And of course you can purchase it, and it's available in a few different languages. I first wrote the book in 2019 because I was, as a journalist and as a researcher, watching the rise of facial recognition. Of course, AI was already starting then. It was nowhere near to the point where we are now as a tool, but it was starting to develop. And there were people saying, hey, this could have some dangerous implications, as well as positive ones. Of course, it's a tool. But generally speaking, was looking at the rise of facial recognition, social credit scores, This is the beginning of central bank digital currencies. I don't even think we had that term yet when I first wrote the book in 2019, but we knew that these different mechanisms could be used to start limiting our freedom of movement, our freedom of choice, et cetera. And so I published the book January 2020, just a couple of months before COVID-19 84 began. And then I updated it again in 2022 based on some of the things that we had learned. And so the exit and build idea comes from that book. And essentially my thesis or my argument is that we can see the surveillance state growing, and we can see the rise of this technocratic ideology that there should be experts running things. Again, we talked about this with Musk and the Bezos and some of the other billionaires that seem to be very much favorable to this this ideology and this philosophy, that they think, well, I've got all this money and all this influence and all this technology, I should probably use it now to start influencing elections, whether that's in the UK, Germany, or US, right? And so I was kind of posing a question of what can people who care about freedom do in the face of such a rising, techno tyranny, as I call it. And again, with the understanding that I don't see much faith or have much faith and see much hope coming through stopping these systems through politics. Okay. So if we're not going to, if politics is incapable of stopping this, and I don't think violence is the answer either. I don't think, trying to overthrow the government violently and force your vision of freedom on the masses of people is morally acceptable or really a wise strategy. If you eliminate those options and you also eliminate apathy and just giving up or being blackpilled, as more people understand it now, then most people would say that's it. Like, you either got apathy, YOLO, giving up and just living your freedom, just living your life, trying to get what you can out of it, or try the political game, or violent insurrection. And I eliminate all three of those options and instead call for what I call exit and build. And so the exit and build idea, it's two-part. It's basically, one relates to physical location. So let's say you were living in the UK and maybe London or somewhere else where things were heavily locked down and rules were very enforced, and you didn't feel like there was freedom and privacy and liberty thriving. Perhaps in that situation, you make a conscious choice to say, you know what, I'm going to get out of the big city. I'm going to exit from that place, and I'm going to go to another location that I feel is more conducive to liberty and privacy and to my values. And I'm going to go build there in terms of building community, connecting with activists, and trying to build your life there. So that's one thing. Exit and build can relate to physical location, which is what I did. I think you did something similar as well. I think many people did things like that in the UK during COVID-19 84, whether it was a town or a state or a whole country, people were making moves. And then the other is more in terms of our practical daily life and habits. And that's exiting from different systems that are not conducive to long-term liberty and privacy. And so that could be basic things like, I'm going to exit off Google and start using alternative tools, or I'm going to exit from the big banks and I'm going to use a small local credit union or a community bank or something like that. Or I'm going to exit from the mainstream food production system by learning how to grow my own food, or at least getting more connected to local growers so I can supplement my food and not be totally dependent on the big box stores. And essentially, you take that idea and apply it holistically to your life. I talk about food, finances, technology. I think there's also a spiritual, mental component, exiting from unhealthy states of minds and limiting beliefs, things like that as well, and building better ones. And so that's essentially what the idea is about, whether we're talking about physical location or in terms of our daily habits and practices.
So I think that's where I could see firsthand, where many people had embraced that philosophy and found greater freedom for themselves in any domain that you've described there. So I've seen so many people change location or become part of communities, started communities. And when we talk about communities, it doesn't necessarily mean, all together in the land, singing Kumbaya, that's almost like this idea that people get. It can be that in physical domain, but it can also just be connecting with people locally that see the world in differently, like yourself. Also seeing people starting their own food projects, connecting with food projects, connecting with different financial systems, looking at decentralized finance, looking at local alternatives. I've seen so much of this in the last 12 months as a result of these two events, that it's blown my mind how many individuals have taken that power back, taken their sovereignty, taken their agency over their own futures, over their own freedom, and started to draw a line where what they will not tolerate anymore when it comes to the external systems and structures. My question then becomes, does that eventually, if enough people make that decision, create a ripple effect where the fabric of society begins to change? Or is there a need for a more systemic approach to actually transforming some of the systems that connect us. Because I forget the quote now, but someone said like politics is like air, whether you choose to like it or not, you breathe it. It's difficult to completely ignore it, because even the state of your roads, unless you're completely off grid and you've built your own roads, it's almost inescapable to connect the realities of the failings of politics. And my goodness, in the UK at the minute, someone said like Britain has some of the worst roads in the world right now. So you really can't escape it, whether you like it or not. So does there need to be something more systemic? How does this strategy become systemic in your view?
Yeah, I think that they both need to happen, right? Like change happens on individual level. I don't think that there's too many movements we can think about, or let's say like broader changes to society or the world at large, or even individual nations, that we can point to a mass movement just appearing out of nowhere and then all of a sudden change happens. It usually starts like, just for example, the most, I think, obvious example in the United States would be the civil rights movement, and Black Americans like MLK Jr. and even Malcolm X, people who are taking a more militant approach and people who are taking a more nonviolent, we're just going to go sit in on these diners. We're going to, sit there and hope that we are served by them. We're going to refuse to get violent, even when they're, punching us and kicking us and throwing stuff on us. Those movements and those marches, once they started to gain attention and media attention and started to gain the sympathy of just, again, regular average people who maybe were somewhat prejudiced against people of color, but after a while started to think, okay, that doesn't seem right. They're just, attacking these people, killing them in some cases, abusing them, whatever. Maybe it's time to rethink the way we view race or the way we judge each other, things like that, right? Like these movements, or you could go to Gandhi in the British Empire. I mean, there's of course nuance in these stories beyond the sort of Disney versions of the stories, but generally speaking, the change starts with that, with like individuals choosing to make a choice, and those movements build, and over time they're able to influence the culture around them. I think something like that is possible with the exit and build strategy, and really, obviously, like the Freedom Cell Network, the People's Reset, everything that I'm involved in and that you've become involved in. These ideas are all overlapping. I mean, I will say that it's been sort of a trip for me to go on the internet and see people using the term exit and build, and people who I've never met. I'm like, okay, the idea is getting out there. That shows me it's having an impact, right? It's going beyond just me and some of my friends, or me and my book just shouting this from the rooftops. Other people have adopted the phrase, and more importantly, adopted the tactics and the strategy. And like you said, they're living it and they're finding more freedom in their life. My view is that as we continue to embrace that, the people who are, let's say, like, okay, I hear you, Dan, I hear you, Derek, that sounds nice, but I'm still going to vote because, it's going to affect my life, or because, and again, I'm not saying it won't affect your life. Like, there will be slight differences depending on the politician in office, but my general argument is that the machine will still march forward. Sure, there might be less discussion of transgenderism, or maybe some immigration policies will change here, or some slight things, or abortion might have this thing or that thing, like the wedge issues, as people often put it, but the machine will march forward. But if we choose instead to say, I'm going to be putting my time, energy into what I can control, what's in my actual reach, what can I control in my life, in my family's lives, and I'm going to focus my energy on that. And even if you did vote, that's the thing, is even if you are a voter and you voted in the UK elections or the US elections or any other elections around the world where you might be hearing this, you can still do exit and build. You can still focus your energy on exit and build strategy. In fact, you did your part now. You went and voted. We can debate all day whether or not that was an effective move, or whether you have some you're complicit in the crimes of whatever the politician may do. But the point is, you've done it. It's over and done. Now focus your energy on what you can do in your own life. I think that's where we should really put our energy. And I do believe over time, we will see that systemic change that you mentioned. In fact, a lot of my ideas are, at the core root of what I believe in, and I mentioned individual liberty earlier. I am a voluntarist. I believe in, it's just another term for a word that a lot of people are afraid of, anarchist. I believe in a voluntary society where all relationships are voluntary and consensual, which I think is what most people support when you get down to it. But when you look at our world and we look at our relationship with government and other institutions, they are anything but voluntary and anything but consensual. And so the sort of voluntarist ethic is that we try to delegitimize the system in the state by removing our support from it. But also, it's not just like, okay, I'm giving up and walking away. We also advocate for education and for, which is obviously what we're doing here, trying to educate people about ideas and empower them to say, hey, look, we don't have to participate. So it's essentially, it's a philosophy of recognizing that each and every person is a sovereign, beautiful being, and that I have certain rights that I want respected. And so I'm going to grant those to other people. But it's also recognition that if we want to create a better world, we need to not participate as much as possible. We need to remove our support from those systems. And so that's kind of one component. That's the exit component, right? But I add this other element. It's not just about withdrawing support. It's also about building the world that we want to see. And that's where, we focus on parallel systems, whether we're talking about education, food, et cetera. That's, to me, where I think we're going to see that long-term systemic change. But it will take time. I think that one of the issues, or maybe criticisms or problems people might have when they hear me talk about exit and build, is that that's not going to solve things for me right now, Derrick. That's not going to fix my problems today or tomorrow, but neither is voting. That's the lie that the politicians sell to us, is that if you just vote for me, I promise you I'm going to fix every single problem that you have. I'm going to do a million different things, and they'll make all kinds of promises. And for the most part, history has shown that those things don't really come true. And if they do happen, they tend to be very watered down from what they promised in the first place. So you can either continue to trust politicians and do nothing, or maybe reserve your faith, have a little faith in that politician if you like, but just in case they happen to be another lying, cheating scumbag like the rest of them, perhaps take care of your own life, perhaps put some energy into that. And I do think with that one by one change, because overall, I believe that's how real change will happen. Going back to my original point, I don't think you can create freedom with just President Trump or some prime minister saying, hey, everybody's free now and we're going to change everything at the press of a button. It has to start in people's minds and people's hearts, because until you can really get to that level, people won't claim their own freedom. They will continue to support tyranny in one form or another. So to me, change has to happen on the individual level, one by one. And then, of course, as it spreads, more people will start to recognize, oh, these people are living more free. They're not being, they're not living under oppression like those of us who are choosing to stay in these so-called traditional systems. Maybe there's something to the way they're living. Maybe I should pursue that. And I think that change will ripple out. But I do think it will take time. I think that what I'm focusing on is a generational change. And I'm fully, as difficult as it can be at times, I operate from the mindset that the change I'm fighting for might not be something I see in my lifetime. But I know that if I do not make the effort now, then future generations won't even have a chance to potentially live in what we're fighting for.
Yeah, when you say generational change, I'm sure I've heard you say there's 7 generations or hundreds of generations. You're working for the long-term future, and I share that sentiment as much as I explore, how these concepts can connect with a systemic level transformation. You're absolutely right. It is those grassroots initiatives that start to actually create a ripple effect, whether it's education, finance, health, food. These things can all make a difference, but ultimately what it comes down to for me, which you've underscored perfectly, is the more free people we have in heart, mind, spirit, and practicality, then the more free society becomes. Society is simply the sum of its parts. So, if more of us become free, more of us find ways to exit and build, then we truly can create a free world, at least a free world for our own good selves. And, the more that spreads, the more free society becomes. It creates a virtuous cycle of freedom. So, and the thing that I want to share just in closing is, having attended the Mexico event, which really, ignited a fire under me to as far as, by the time the event had finished, I said, Derrick, can we please bring this to the United Kingdom? You said yes. We announced it from stage. No idea how we were going to make it happen. We made it happen. We came to the UK. Derrick came to the UK, brought the whole team. We delivered the People's Reset UK. We lit a fire over here as well. There was an energy in that room that was just, I will never forget. There were so many people that came up to me and said it's the best event they've been to in their lifetimes. It's the experience. It's the feeling of feeling free. It's that really that moment you can't enshrine in words. So as much as all the practical strategies people can learn from stage about the things they can implement in their life, there's nothing more powerful than really feeling what it feels like to feel free and be amongst free-minded, free beings. So, I'm going to give my plug, but I'm going to give it to you to drive home, Derrick. come and join us in Mexico. At the point of releasing this, we're going to be gathering in Mexico in a couple of weeks. If you're watching from the United Kingdom, I'm making an assumption the weather's not brilliant. Come and join us in the beautiful sunshine in Morelia. It was wonderful last year, like 27 degrees. I'm a redhead, pale guy, and I loved it. So come and be part of the 5-day experience. It's the 3-day experience that we had in the UK on steroids. It's the 5-day full experience. You'll get to experience the entirety of the event. It would be a dream holiday for you, an educational experience, a retreat that you could not imagine. So do come and join us in Mexico. But I'm going to let Derrick close it out with his take on why you should come to Mexico, because I can say my piece, but you're the man. This is your event, your vision, your dream, and you've built an amazing community worldwide around this. So why should people come and join us in Mexico, Derrick?
Yeah, thank you for that, Dan. And I just want to reemphasize what you said there about the UK. I mean, even for us, that was our 6th activation, as we call them. The first one, obviously, in the UK, but it was right up there with the best of them of that we've held, and met so many great people. And I will say, what's really cool for me and for anybody who is still open to the idea of making a somewhat last minute journey to Mexico is there's going to be quite a bit of people from the UK, because that's one thing that we saw is once we came to the UK and we announced the tickets were for sale for Mexico, there was a lot of tickets being purchased from people from UK and Europe. So I think we're going to have a pretty good contingent from over there. So if you are coming, even in Mexico, you might find somebody local to your area. But yeah, this is that. Like you said, a year ago, we met here in Mexico, and that was the final of the Greater Reset. We've since rebranded as the People's Reset, and the first official event under that name was actually in the UK. So this will be the first People's Reset in Mexico. And I'm really excited to have you back, Dan, to be speaking. I know you're going to be sharing some powerful ideas and messages. And we're going to have just, it's the usual thing. If you're familiar with it, it's 5 days of 100% solutions focused talks. We talk about everything we've discussed here, from technology that can empower you to growing your own food or getting more connected to the growers, and getting out of the education system, building parallel systems, how to take care of your mental, physical, spiritual health. And I think we have another stellar lineup of speakers. One of the things I always remind people is that when you go look at the website, which is thepeoplesreset.org, and you check out our speakers, you're going to see people you might recognize, like myself and Dan and a few other people who are more prominent and might have a following. But you're also going to see some names of people that you've never heard of, but they are doing amazing work, and that's why we selected them. I mean, literally, as the year goes on, so let's say after this event ends, I'm going to spend the rest of the year doing talks and traveling and meeting people, and we handpick and select people that we meet from all around the world and just say, we need you to come to our stage. We need you to share this message. We need you to share this idea or this tool you're working on. And just one example, one of the people we're bringing, they're from a company called Eden Energy, and they are focused on alternative forms of energy, turning waste into energy, and how we can power our homes without being on the mainstream grid. They're working with villages in Africa right now on doing that. These are not kind of abstract ideas. These are things that are already happening, that are already being used. And that's, those are the kind of things that are exciting for me, is we know the problems are ripe and they're out there and they're going to continue. And we know that there are politicians promising they can save everything and fix everything for you. As I said earlier, even if you are a voter, you still are welcome to the People's Reset. This isn't a sort of, we all got to think the same to get along and hang out together. In fact, diversity of ideas is welcomed, if anything. Like we love that. And so there's going to be 30 speakers. I will say one of the changes that we're making this year, Dan, is that we're actually going to have less speakers, because one of the things that we heard at the UK and at our events in Mexico is that people want more networking time. So actually every single day now, the final hour of the day is going to be a networking session based around that specific theme. So we'll have all the speakers, and then around 4 or so in the afternoon, that final hour of the day will be dedicated to networking around health and networking around permaculture and growing food, and so on and so on. So we added more networking time. We've added a couple more panels. We've also added more Mexican speakers, because just like us coming to the UK, we wanted to represent and highlight those based in the UK and Europe who are doing great work. We want to highlight all of the brilliant people we are meeting in Mexico and around Latin America, who some speak English, some do not, who are sharing their ideas. And so there's going to be a number of talks that will be in Spanish. As with all of our past events in Mexico, the entire event is free for Mexicans. So if anybody hearing this knows friends or family in Mexico, you should encourage them to come if they want to meet like-minded people and hear solutions. It's important for us to make sure that because I wasn't born in Mexico, and my partner, she wasn't born in Mexico, her family's from Mexico, but we wanted to make sure that we're coming here not to have some sort of elitist event that is only marketed to rich expats who can afford to fly down to Mexico for 5 days, but to the locals as well. So it's free for all the locals. We have more Mexican speakers on every single day of the event now. And so when those locals come, if they don't speak English, they're able to check out headsets and hear all the talks live in their own language, and vice versa. When there's Spanish speakers on stage, English speakers who don't speak Spanish can check out the headsets and they can hear those talks live in English as well. And so we're really making an effort to build these international bridges. And I think that's what's most important, whether you're in Mexico or the UK or Australia or parts of Asia. There are sometimes cultural and language barriers, but I promise you, beyond those barriers are activists just like you who care about making the world a better place. And if we can find ways to overcome those barriers and to bridge those gaps, I think that's how we're going to really lead to that systemic change we were talking about, Dan. It's not going to come, I believe, just from one city, one town, one nation. I mean, I want a world that's as free as possible. And to do that, we got to take this message as far and wide as possible. That's why we wanted to come to the UK. And I hope that in the near future, we can do something else again in the UK and Europe or anywhere else out there that might want us to host this. But this, I think, is truly going to be our best event yet because of everything I just mentioned, but also just the beautiful crowd of people who come there. And there's so much to get into. I mean, if you are considering coming from the UK and you can take off a week or a little more from work, in addition to the 5 days of the events, there's going to be dinners, there's going to be concerts. We've got Dub FX coming. He came and performed in the UK. Him and his wife are coming now. They're both going to be performing in Mexico. This is their first time in Mexico, and they're doing a little Mexico tour out of it. So we're happy to help them do that. And there's going to be, for those who are interested there's going to be ayahuasca ceremonies and cacao ceremonies. As I mentioned, the concerts, the networking. There's going to be excursions to the local pyramids and sightseeing of Morelia, which is a beautiful city, built in the 15th century. Just so much to plug into. So again, if you, like Dan said, if you're trying to get away from the weather, that's, I'm sure, a big draw on its own.
Yeah, it is.
But on a bigger front, as far as connecting and getting recharged, to me, I think that's one of the biggest things that our event probably offers, is why we call it an activation, is because anybody who has come to the events, they go home feeling inspired, motivated, activated, like on fire. You've heard the comments, Dan. I've heard them. And it's such a humbling experience to even be a part of it, because there's so much work and stress and time and money goes into these things. But at the end of the day, when we get emails and messages or hugs and handshakes of people telling us how life-changing the experience was, it makes it all worth it. So I definitely would encourage people, if you have the means, we invite you to come in person. I will also mention the entire event will be streamed for free. So if you can't come, get together with some friends and family in your local area. Watch the whole thing if you can. If not, maybe pick the theme that you think is most relevant to you and watch at home. Discuss the ideas, implement them in your life. That's what matters more than anything, is that we come together, we share ideas, we cross-pollinate, we network. New relationships are formed, new businesses, new partnerships, and then we all go home, wherever that may be, and we start implementing these ideas in our lives. And I'm sure you're going to mention it, Dan, but we also are offering a special coupon to your audience right now as well.
Yeah, that's right. So we've got a discount code Libertas, which we'll put in the comments in the description, so you can access that and get a discount on your tickets. I can't stress enough how powerful it will be to make that trip. And I'm semi joking about the weather, but ultimately that is a benefit as well for us over here, and actually a lot of the workshops outside on the green last year was incredible. So you get to hang out and meet and connect in this amazing environment. So I do hope you'll join us. And just interesting, Derrick, in closing, the energy that I feel in myself hosting this conversation shifted dramatically when we moved from talking about politics to talking about solutions. Like, there was a tension in my body when we were talking about the political game, and how just light I felt when we started talking about solutions, how optimistic I felt, and real hope. We talked about the political hope earlier on. There's just that real hope and optimism comes flooding in when we start talking about these opportunities. So I'm so excited again to be there. I'm working really hard, Derrick, to maintain my health. Last year I had some challenges, so I'm hoping to be there in full form. Really excited to meet the rest of the speakers and the attendees. So thanks so much for being with us today, Derrick. Such an important conversation at an important time. Do come and join us in Mexico. If you're brand new to this podcast, this is the Dan Astin-Gregory podcast, please do hit the subscribe button. You'll find us on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble. Spotify, Apple, all the major platforms. Just hit subscribe and you'll get notified when more conversations, bold conversations like this come live. And if you want to go the next step, you can also be part of our online supporter community, the Live Free and Prosper community at DanAstin-Gregory.com/supporter. Derrick, any other links we want to share? The website this year, what's the URL for the event?
Thepeoplesreset.org is the best place to go there, and you can get your tickets there. Check out the schedule's been posted. I didn't even mention the 40 plus workshops, like you said, are going to be out in the green space. So check that out. We've got all that on the website. And if you're interested in just following my work, my journalism, you can find me at theconsciousresistance.com. I appreciate you having me on, Dan.
Pleasure, brother. I'll see you in Mexico in a couple of weeks. Big love to you.